Where are you willing to submit your freedom? Because your idols require submission. And you're going to say, well, I can't do that today because I got to do this. Or I want to get better at this. I'm going to sacrifice part of my day to do this. How about this? What are you unwilling to question? Oh, that's probably an idol. What do you get angry about when someone dents it?
Men's Alliance is tribes across the nation that meet weekly for rugged outdoor workouts and real-world devotions around a fire. We are changing what Christian men's ministry in this country looks like. And when you're ready to challenge yourself physically and spiritually, join us at men'salliancetribe.com. Welcome to the Men's Alliance podcast. I'm Dave Mills Goose, and back with us today on the Men's Alliance podcast, one of our favorite guests. We've got J. Warner Wallace, famous for being a cold case homicide detective and author of one of my favorite books, Cold Case Christianity, along with several others, Person of Interest. And his latest one here, we're going to be talking about today, The Truth in True Crime and what investigating death teaches us about life. So, Jim, thanks for being back on the podcast, brother.
Yeah, I'm really glad to join you on it. This is important stuff, so I'm glad to contribute in some way if I can.
Absolutely. You know, if you guys aren't following J. Warner Wallace, his ministry, his podcast, his books, his website, I definitely encourage you to do that. One of the things that his ministry has done for me is it's helped me to be able to articulate things that maybe I kind of always felt or kind of thought to be the case. But I wasn't sure if that was just me, and then I certainly wasn't sure how to word that. So that's why you need to get yourself into reading these types of books. One of the questions that we talk a lot about, or themes we talk about in Men's Alliance, that I wanted to put to you as a question is this topic of transformational experiences. When a person has a big transformational experience that was very powerful to them in their life, and then they try to use that transformational experience in evangelism. They try to use that experience in sharing the gospel. And we don't have to stay here, the whole podcast. This isn't part of the book, but it's something that it's so heavy on my mind because I've been having conversations over these past 2 weeks with people. What are your thoughts, Jim, on personal experiences for sharing the gospel?
Well, I mean, look, I would say that they're important, but not as important as people think. And here's why I say that. I wrote a book a number of years ago. I think it was in 2017. And it's called Forensic Faith. And the reason why I wrote the book is because I got encouraged to write my first book by Sean McDowell, another apologist. And I was with his high school group, training them on the way to Berkeley, UC Berkeley, because as a youth pastor, I used to do these immersive trips to UC Berkeley because they were so powerful for my students, because we would encounter atheists there on the campus of UC Berkeley, and it gave our students a chance to really kind of process how well they knew their stuff. And I'm training with Sean, and he encouraged me to kind of make an outline out of the kinds of things I was teaching his students. Well, I was teaching his students biblical reliability, and that became Cold Case Christianity. I just dumbed into it. It wasn't like I was meaning to make that my first book. But as I wrote that book, I found that people, as I was traveling with it and talking to different church leaders, I realized, church leaders don't think this stuff matters. Sadly, there's usually a deacon or an elder who convinces a pastor, hey, bring this guy out. He can make a case for Christianity.
Right.
But the pastor doesn't see any need to do it at all. And if it was just the pastor, you probably would never have been invited. But there's somebody in his circle of trust that said, yeah, we should probably teach our folks how to make a case for this. And so I started asking, I knew at that point that I needed to write a book to make a case for why you should make a case, a case for the case, basically. And that became Forensic Faith, this book. And here's what I try to communicate in that book. It hits your point right on the head. When I ask people around the country, why are you a Christian? The most popular answer is, number one, I was raised that way. That is the by far most popular answer.
Mm.
The number two answer is I've had an experience that I can't explain any other way. It demonstrated for me that Christianity was true. Either I had a transformational experience in my own life. I was an alcoholic, and God lifted me out of that. I was an addict, or it could be that I prayed something that I saw was answered, and these coincidences couldn't be coincidences. God had to be the hand of God. Some kind of an experience that confirmed for them this was true. The third kind of answer is typically more theological. And it's kind of something like, I didn't. God's the one who called me. There was nothing I did, or no, there's no reason for me to be other than God just called me. And this is okay. So look at those three answers for a second. Those were not persuasive for me, and I'll tell you why. My dad remarried. He's an atheist. I was raised in kind of very much in his cut from his cloth. Was not a believer till I was 35. His second wife, though, is a Mormon. And although he never became a Mormon because he's a very committed atheist, he thought it was helpful for her, and he raised 6 kids with her. All of them were raised LDS by her. Now, if you ask my 6 brothers and sisters why they are Mormon, they're going to tell you, number one, they were raised in the church. Number two, they had an experience that demonstrated for them that Joseph Smith's a prophet of God and the Book of Mormon is true. Now, most of your audience, if they're Christians listening to this, they know that those 2 reasons do not make Mormonism true. They also don't make Christianity true. Are they part of the story? Of course. But you have to interpret your experiences. You don't know that experience is just from God. Clearly, the Mormons' experience is not from God. But whoever they're worshiping is not the God of the Bible. So it's clearly not from God. So it's a both and. It's not an either or. You have to take your personal testimony and marry it to the facts. Like if you wanted to know how would I, like something happened. I had this amazing experience, but how do I know where it came from? Well, that's what we do when we investigate the case and we investigate why Christianity is true. We're doing it because we want a faith that's not just blind or not guided by a wrong set of facts. We want a faith that is guided by the truth, by a true set of facts, even though those facts will never answer every question you have. You'll still have to take a step of trust given what you know evidentially. And that is a step of faith, but it's not a blind faith. It's a forensic faith. It's built on something that's pointing in a certain direction. And you have to step across your unanswered questions to make a decision, which is what juries do every day in courts of law around the country. I tell jurors all the time, I'm not going to be able to tell you everything you want to know, but I can tell you everything you need to know. And in the end, you're going to have some unanswered questions. I don't know everything that could be known, but I can tell you what you need to know. And you'll be able to step across your unanswered questions and render a verdict. But by the way, we do this all the time. If you put a key in a door lock, do you know how a door lock works? No. Do you have unanswered questions about how the tumblers turn? Yeah. Do you still put your key in with a certain expectation? Of course. Do you know how your car works? Even if you do you know how your new Tesla works? Because I guarantee you could be good on carburetors and you get to these new cars and you're like, what in the world is under that hood? But you still turn the ignition. It turns out that we operate at that level all the time. It's the difference between working at possible doubt, which is a high standard. I can't prove anything beyond a possible doubt. I can't even prove that I'm really talking to you right now beyond a possible doubt. But there's reasonable doubt. It's a lower standard. We live in that reasonable doubt range. And the difference between reasonable and possible doubt are all your unanswered questions. So stop making possible doubt the standard for faith because you'll never reach anything.
Yeah.
There's nothing you know right now beyond a possible doubt. But if reasonable doubt's your standard, you're still going to have some unanswered questions. And your experience may, in fact, have been from God. Great. But if you don't test it, you don't know really where it's from. And it seems like every other system, this is true also for Muslims, everyone thinks that they've had some experience that demonstrates that their worldview is true. So now what do we do with that? So clearly some of us are wrong because these ideas are contradictory. But if you believe as a Mormon, you cannot reconcile the Jesus of Scripture with the Jesus of Mormonism. You cannot reconcile the Jesus of Scripture with the Jesus of Islam. They make contradictory terms. We could all be wrong, but we can't all be right. And it's more, in order to figure out who is right, it would be probably wise to trust more than your experience.
Well, Yeah, I think along with that, a lot of Christians, they say their story, thinking that it sounds convincing, but then, like you just did with Mormonism, when you imagine yourself hearing the story from another person, you realize how truly ineffectual it is, right? Like if I'm sitting on an airplane beside of a Muslim and they're trying to convert me to Islam, they're going to have to do a lot more than tell me that they had an amazing experience.
Right.
That's going to be like, okay, well, that's cool for you. I have not had that experience. So, yeah, I think that that's a really great way that you put that to kind of get all of us Christians thinking about, especially it's not an either or, it's a both and, right? So,
Well, and it's so funny. I've been at campuses. I remember that I was at Ohio State one time doing a presentation before all these students. It was open presentation, and anyone on the campus could come. So I'm doing a presentation. I think it was on biblical reliability. It was just on the old cold case Christianity stuff. And I was at the end of it. One of the very first questions in the Q&A was a young lady who stood up at the back of the room. It was a huge, huge auditorium, and asked, "Well, can you share your testimony with us?" And I said, "Oh, I could, but I'll be honest, my testimony doesn't matter, and either does yours.
mm,
What matters is what we just did. Is it true?" Because it turns out that everything you're going to measure in terms of your experience, you're not going to have to measure through whether or not Jesus is who he said he was. It's not just that. All of the crazy teaching of Christianity, all that crazy traditional stuff that we call conservative Christian worldview, all that stuff that you're going to have to think about when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to sanctity of life, when it comes to identity, all the things that are so unpopular in culture right now. It turns out there's no point in starting there. What you need to do is start upstream with the issue of who is Jesus. If Jesus is who he said he was, I guarantee you're not going to get in front of a holy God of the universe, if there is one, and wag your finger and say, well, I don't, yeah, but. No, I think when we're in front of that holy God of the universe, we're just going to go, okay, yeah, I get it. And if Jesus is that God of the universe, then everything he teaches on those issues, we will eventually bend our knee to those. And I get it. It may not be the thing that's popular in culture. It may not be popular with your friends. Don't worry about that right now. Worry about who is Jesus. Because in the end, that's going to change the way you think, probably. And certainly the way you live. And it's not a limiter, by the way. It turns out that there's great freedom because everyone's a slave to something right now. And there's great freedom if there is a God. There would be great freedom in simply knowing what's true, knowing why we were created this way. And if you're going to be a slave to something, be a slave to that God, because I'll tell you what, that's where our true freedom is.
mm,
Because you want to flourish, you're not going to flourish by trying to guess the rules, trying to guess the traits you could adopt. How about if you just asked the designer who designed you to function a certain way? I always say when it comes to identity, if you don't know what this is, well, you could look at the brand, and then you could Google it or YouTube it or whatever young people are doing right now to find out answers, right? And you'll
mm-hmm.
find a manufacturer's website, and then you can read and say, okay, this was designed as a mouse, and you can do certain, okay, I get it now. It turns out the surest way to know what something's purpose is to refer to the manufacturer.
Mm.
And so there's great freedom in actually submitting. That's the backward thinking, because we all think freedom means I don't have to submit to anything. Well, no. There's great freedom in submitting to your creator, because now you know what you're actually going to perform the way you're supposed to.
Yeah. I think also hearing you say that, it gets me thinking about what would I say that I'm a slave to? I like my very first thought as soon as you said that sentence was I was thinking I'm a slave to the truth. And then you said God, and I'm like, well, those are actually synonymous, right? If Jesus is the
Right.
truth,
Right.
then being a slave to the truth will always lead us to God. God is truth. And then we get into this whole relativist, new way of thinking where everyone says, well, that's your truth. And that's just I've got my truth and you've
Yeah.
got yours.
Let me
And
challenge you on this, though, Dave. Let me push back a little bit,
good.
because that's what this book does for me. There's a chapter in this book on worship, And it's a story of a guy named Santa Claus who was in our city. He was a homeless man who was older, looked like Santa Claus, white hair, white beard. So that's why everyone called him Santa Claus. And I won't go into too much detail on that, but there's a chapter in there that really focuses on worship. So you and I are, this is, so we're here we are on a platform creating a video. Now, if I want to know what I'm truly a slave to, because yes, I would argue that my identity is in Christ, but and I would argue that God is my object of worship, but there are things that give away what really is important to us,
Mm-hmm.
and they're the things that we have a tendency to trust to get us in a jam. And they're the things that if I really want to know what someone worships, just give me your calendar.
Mm.
Let me just chart your day. Especially if you're like me, where you're at a point now where I'm retired and I have discretionary time. Turns out my discretionary time, but you have it too. We all have discretionary time. And we're going to spend it on something. And what we spend it on is probably the thing that we think is of primary importance. And although I can say, for example, oh, I want to communicate the gospel to the world around me because I feel like it's such good news. I want other people to hear the good news. But at some point, I noticed that my desire to be effective became the thing I was worshiping. So if I did a video and no one watched it, it would bum me out. It would take up headspace. I'd be thinking about it. If I thought that the platform wasn't growing fast enough, or the organization's not growing fast enough, so I suddenly realized that, yeah, all this stuff is supposed to be pointed to Jesus, but it's becoming the thing that's standing between me and Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
It's becoming the thing that if you really were to drill down, the God of the universe knows, really, I'm probably more concerned about how well that went than I was about honoring him with it. I'm just being honest with my own life.
Yeah.
And so as I saw this happening, and it took me about 10 years to see it, I began to kind of pull back from the things that were the false objects of worship. It's not healthy, for example, for any of us as Christ followers to take a conference stage and be applauded on the way up.
Mm.
That's not healthy. Because at some point, that's going to start to become the thing you actually value. And even if it's a small distraction, I don't want the distraction anymore. So we have to kind of be thinking about, well, so how do we, I remember, I think it was Seinfeld who said, as a comedian, the way to keep the celebrity thing from messing with you is that as soon as you're done with the set, go home. Just go home. Don't hang out there. Go home. And it's hard as you're an author because what happens is you speak at a conference and then you go to a book table.
Yeah.
It's not, this is so I'm just saying, what I've learned as a 63-year-old guy now is that I have to be very careful to protect the things that give away what I really worship, which is my discretionary time, my discretionary money, the headspace, what I'm thinking about, right? How I identify myself, truly how I identify. Because I can say I'm a Christ follower, but most of the time when I get introduced, no one introduces me as a Christ follower. They introduce me as a cold case detective. So I'm struggling with all those things. And as I was watching that over the years, watching other people struggle with it, a lot of this I was seeing in crimes. And that's why this book really tries to capture things like 15 things that'll help people flourish. Because I saw this upside down in the world I was working in, even amongst the cops I was working with, things like identity, things like misplaced worship. These are things that if you just master these 15 things, oh my gosh, you'll have the most amazing life. But most of us don't do these well. I don't do any of these well. Even though I want to, I don't do them well. And it means having to make certain sacrifices, right? Because yes, when you said, yes, I think what's of primary value is truth. Well, that kind of orders our lives. And that's our project, right, as men. But I'll tell you right now, if you post this and no one watches it, you'll be bummed.
You're right. I will be.
Because it turns out for most of us, men equate our identity with our achievements.
Yeah.
And here's how we do it. When you look at the research, this is a different chapter in the book. I think it's the second chapter in the book. If you look at the research on this, you'll see that you almost will find no research on identity that is not tied to value and purpose. So as men, what we do is we attach our identity to where we think we have value or purpose. And we can do it backwards. Sometimes we'll say, well, where do I have value? What am I good at? Okay, that's who I am. So we let the value and purpose be the tail that wags the identity dog. We should probably do the opposite. Figure out who are you, and then find your value and purpose in who you really know you are. But we don't do it that way. So that means when we get done doing a project like this, and trust me, dude, look, I say this all the time. No one writes a book they want no one to read. Okay.
Right.
And I certainly don't. Well, then I'm thinking, well, okay, these things were important. I needed to say them. Did I? Or am I just so pridefully thinking that this work defines me, that it gives me value? And now I don't even know if it's humanly possible to detach these things, but I know we have to try. Because
no, you're right. It is
we can't worship
struggle.
a God if we're still worshiping ourselves.
No, and I think what you're pointing out is we can take anything, even a great thing, and we can make it an idol.
Well, that's exactly. Here's the thing I'd say about that, and that's what this chapter tries to do. Everything we turn into an idol is a great thing. We just are mispurposing it.
Right.
So everything is. That's what makes them so attractive. Because the only things you turn into idols, there's only three things you turn into idols. There's the same three things that cause every problem in the world, the same three motives behind any crime. It's sex, money, power. That's it. There's nothing you've ever turned into an idol that wasn't in one of those three groups. It's as simple as that. So this is what happened in this particular story. In this, I'll just briefly outline it for you. So this Santa Claus guy, he's like a nobody. What is he doing? Nothing. He's invisible to our community. He was canning in the back alleys, collecting cans out of alleys. By the mid-afternoon, he had enough money, enough cans to go cash them in back then we had these recycling centers in town. He would cash them in, and then he had to have just enough money to buy himself one meal, usually a day. And then he would buy himself alcohol, and then that would be the rest of his day. And then he would sleep locally, either outside at this particular time of the season where it was winter. He was sleeping in a porta potty at a construction site. It was a clean porta potty because it was a pretty new construction site. And that's where he was killed. And I thought, well, who in the world would kill him, considering he has nothing to offer in sex, money, or power? Because that's what's behind every murder. So it was puzzling to me that this guy who offered nothing to a killer in sex, money, or power would ultimately be killed. Well, it's because he had irritated another canner who he had slipped into some alleys that this other guy, this younger guy, thought were his territory. I'm in those alleys every day. Don't be coming over here looking in those dumpsters. So think about this. How much money do you think Santa Claus was digging out of those trash cans a day? What, $1.50? You're going to kill somebody for $1.50? Yeah, if it's your idol. That's the funny thing about idols, is that once you've got one, everything shifts, and now you're a slave to the idol. That's why this whole thing started in my head when you talked about, it's about now I'm a slave to the idol.
Yeah.
So now suddenly $1.50 matters. And then he confronts Santa Claus at the recycling center, and Santa Claus kind of just blows him off. Doesn't say anything harsh, just doesn't give him much attention in front of his friends. Oh, you've now basically you've disrespected me. Power.
Yeah.
Now you might think that's going to get somebody to kill. Yeah, again, because if your idols are power, street cred, and $1.50, you will over amplify those. And now suddenly no one dare not bruise them, scratch them, dent them in some way. These are my idols. And that night he went out and shook the porta potty until Santa Claus came out and he stabbed him to death. Okay. That misplaced worship, it's always over something that is in itself given to us by God for our good. Yet what we do is, rather than worship God, we stop the one layer short of God in the things he's created for us. And there's the problem, right? And you could almost argue that every murder I've ever worked was an object lesson in misplaced worship, idolatry. But I think when I say that, it almost sounds too spiritual. I can over spiritualize it. So I never put it that way.
It's a fancy term. Yeah.
Yeah. But the reality of it is misplaced worship. I now think that this thing is so important. The sex with my girlfriend is now going to warrant me killing my wife. I got one case where the guy simply could not get his retirement. He wanted, after the divorce, he wanted all of his retirement. She just wanted a modest part of it. He was willing to kill her over that modest part. So whatever it is that you think is your idol, that you think is of primary importance, and here's what I would say to all of us who are content creators as Christians on YouTube or anywhere else, is that we have to be careful, because then that becomes the thing that's giving our life purpose, our ministry purpose. I'm the author of blah, 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 right? Instead of, and I think that how we identify ourselves gives away our idols often.
So what do you do to combat that, Jim?
Well, I think that Seinfeld's advice is excellent.
Staying grounded.
Yeah, you got to stay grounded. And I think one of the things that keeps me grounded is I have somebody in my life who I've given permission to shape me. So marriage matters. That's another chapter in this book. And if the purpose of marriage is just for me to find my ultimate satisfaction and it's about sex, it's about relationship, if that's the purpose of marriage, you're going to eventually you only have a certain part of your marriage you'll actually enjoy, right? Because at some point you're eventually, things that are new are going to become common. Things they're going to get to know you and start to call you out on things. They're going to see the real you, and suddenly it's going to be hard. It's going to feel painful sometimes to be married to somebody who actually knows the real you. But if the purpose of marriage is that I am going to have permission to help create the best version of her that can be presented to a holy God, and I've given her permission to create the best version of me that can be presented to a holy God, well, that's a different purpose. And that's also a purpose that'll keep you from idolatry, because if I can get off the stage and go home, I have someone at home who will tell me the truth about how I've misplaced my devotion on times, and this should not be important. Every time Susie has recentered me, she was right, and I just have to learn to listen. So I think that one of the best things you can do is to, at least if you're not married, to have a community that can tell you the truth. There's another chapter in this book about friendships, and it turns out the statistics show it, the studies show it, that the kinds of friends that help you flourish are the friends that have permission to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
So I think that part of it for me was, and I think that if you look at, there's also a chapter in this book on celebrity. I think if you look at what drives celebrity, and so I try to, whenever I write a book, I try to spend as much time as possible researching everything from a secular perspective first. And if you research the secular studies on celebrity, and by the way, it sounds like, well, that's not my issue. Oh yeah, it is. If you've got social media, it is, because we all have the opportunity without a gatekeeper to pursue mini celebrity, and everyone likes to have more likes on their post rather than less likes, more followers who follow their stuff rather than less followers. What is it that drives us toward wanting to be known this way? And this research is pretty clear on it. First, it's a sense that we want the kind of fellowship, the kind of friends. We want to be liked. We want to be affirmed. We want to be known. We want to be loved. But fame doesn't ever deliver that. And if you read the book from Matthew Perry before he overdosed, or Anthony Bourdain, anyone who's committed suicide or overdosed in the last 5 years who was famous, you'll see it doesn't satisfy that. These are not real friends.
Mm-hmm.
These are just people who don't even know the real you. That's why to have someone that you're married to who knows the real you and wants to help you become a better version of you, oh my gosh, that's a gift. And sometimes your friends can do that for you.
One thing we say in Men's Alliance is a friend who lets you believe your own lies is no friend at all.
That's a great way to put it.
And to your point, wives, I think God, endowed wives with a special ability to keep us humble. And, hearing you say that is one of the tools to remedy, this problem of idolatry, man, that's absolutely resonates with me. I'm 45 now. When I was 30 and 32, I was doing Ironman triathlons, and I thought that was really a cool big deal, and I was really proud of myself. And who was super not impressed with that?
Yeah,
of course you do.
Yeah,
my wife. Yeah, my wife is like, okay, great. Now you need to take out the trash.
That's right.
Take the kids to practice.
Yeah, there's like 15 other things she would rather you work on than your
Exactly.
Ironman. Yeah.
Exactly. And I look back on that stage of my life, And, you know, I told my wife, I'm like, I feel like I was really selfish during that period. And she's like, you think? You think?
You
Right?
know,
And so
let me
hearing
just
that Seinfeld said that, I get it.
yeah, yeah. Well, let me just say this to you too. That's such a good observation, and I was talking about this to Susie yesterday. It's like looking back, I can see that there was a number of things that I did that I thought were so important that I was willing to
Mm,
sacrifice other important things to achieve them. You know, there was a season where I was working undercover. There was a season where I was on the homicide team. There was a season when I got saved, and I thought, oh, I want to go to seminary. 7 years it took me to get a master's in theology because I was working full time, and I
mm,
was willing during any one of these. Oh, there was a season when my kids were in high school. Those 4 years, I was their high school pastor. Then I launched a church. I was so over the top for 6 years with that church, and every time I turned a corner to something new, I would look back and I would go, wow. Yeah, I don't know why did I sacrifice some, I mean, looking back at it, I'm glad I did it, but it wasn't nearly as important as I thought it was looking back at it. It's like,
right.
I'm like you're saying with the Iron Man, okay, this was good, but now you're looking back at it and going, why was I so, well, if you do that enough times, and I've done that now enough times, now you have to kind of ask yourself today, what is the thing
Hmm.
I'm doing today that 5 years from now, I'm going to say, wow, because if you're wired like me, there's always something that you think is so important that you're willing to sacrifice other things that you just don't even realize are actually more important.
Yeah.
So,
I've asked myself that question about Men's Alliance right now. I'm like, is this going to be a thing where 10 years, 15 years from now, am I going to look back and say, man, I went through this crazy, weird period where I was doing this whole Men's Alliance ministry thing. And will my wife look at me and go, yeah,
you
what were you
think?
doing? You
Yeah,
know?
you
So I
think she'll
think,
say that again.
and, and I don't think that that's the case, but I am asking myself this a lot.
Yeah, but
I'm
keep in mind,
trying to,
David, we never thought any of those things were the
that's
case.
true.
And now we look
That's
back at
true.
them and they were. So, look,
But obviously I wouldn't be doing it if I thought that it was going to be that, you know?
well, and
So
that
it's
was the
like,
case for me with the youth pastorate. That was the
right.
case for me with the lead pastorate. That was the case for me in every one of these steps. And then I had a season writing books. Look, I think they're all good things because they are all things that served God. But you, again, what are idols? They are good things that you have turned and twisted into the main thing. So at some point, uh, I remember, for example, um, I just now in the last year have become just fanatical again about being in scripture to the point where like Susie's like, okay, you need to like moderate this a little bit because I mean, if you ask me, I could be in it all day long. And I just bought, in April, I bought a new Bible that's a wide margin Bible because I've been through so many of them writing notes. But I'll tell you, when I was the biggest fanatic in the first, I'd say 5 years as a Christian, I was just, and let me tell you when it stopped. It stopped for me, if I'm honest, when I entered seminary. And I hear a lot about seminarians say the same thing because this raw passion for God's word became like, oh, this is a study tool. Like I got to write a article about this theological issue, and now my passion for just reading and going, wow, do you see this? Was like, okay, I got to find them. How's that connect? Like it became like work.
Yeah.
And
It
it
takes the
ruined it
joy
for
out of
me.
it.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
probably took another 10 years after seminary to fall back in love with just and so everything, this is scripture is a good thing, but what we do is we twist it and we turn it. And so here's what I would say about what you said about like, yeah, is this going to be the thing? Yeah, these are all good things. You won't, but here's what I'll say to you. I don't think we're ever going to look back at a season in which we invested in the most important institution that God has given us on this side of the grave, which is our marriage.
Yeah.
And we're going to go, yeah, well, I really shouldn't have sacrificed so much for that.
Men, are you looking to buy a new home? Maybe it's a vacation home, maybe a rental property, or maybe it's building your dream home and you need a mortgage. Well, I want to tell you about a tribesman who can help you with just that. Chris Norwood, call sign Coop from Hammer Tribe. He works at Towne Bank Mortgage. He has been doing this for over 21 years. He's qualified to lend in 16 states. He can definitely help you out. Let me give you his contact info. You can go to townebankmortgage.com/Chris Norwood, or you can call him directly at 804-439-3600. 3206. Again, this is Chris Norwood, call sign Coop. He's a Men's Alliance guy from Towne Bank Mortgage who can help get you a loan for your dream home. He even helped Iron buy his new house. Check him out.
There's another chapter in this book where I talk about trajectory decisions. And I did that because when I'm teaching high schoolers, and I'm at Summit Worldview Conference in Colorado, whenever I tell high school, I ask, if you're leaving the moon, or leaving the Earth rather, you're heading to the moon, and you're almost to the moon, and you're a mile away from the moon, you make a 2-degree error in your trajectory, you're still going to land on the moon. You're pretty darn close to begin with. But if you make the same 2-degree error from planet Earth, you're going to miss the moon by millions of miles. Some decisions are trajectory decisions. They have to be made early, and they're of primary importance, because they set the course for everything else. So I asked these students, in the next 5 years, you're 18. In the next 5 years, what are the most important trajectory decisions you're going to make? And almost all of them will say career.
Nope.
I think as men, we often say our choices are given away by our priorities. And if you look at what we've done, it probably looks like it was career. But it turns out the most important singular, the first one is worldview, because every other decision is made on the back of what is true about the world. So if you don't think Christianity is true, get away from it. If you think it is true, get in, because you need to know which view of the world actually describes the world the way it really is. That's number one. Number two, though, is spouse.
Yeah.
It's not career. It's not mission. It's not goal.
Right. It's relatively easy to switch careers compared to switching spouses.
Well, not only that, there's a day coming when you will not be leading Men's Alliance.
Right.
Or you won't be in your job. You'll be retired.
You won't be a doctor. You won't be a captain or a colonel. Yeah, listen, you're going to be just a dude.
I know people, though, who are right now in their 70s, and they can't retire. Not that they can't afford to. Like
it's their identity?
Yes.
Yeah.
So your identity, it turns out, is based on your trajectory decisions. If the trajectory decisions are worldview, spouse, mission, your identity ought to be first as a Christian, in Christ, in your marriage, in your job, in that order, because that's the trajectory decision order. So Christ first, but your spouse second. And that's the thing I think we don't do.
I want to say this and to listeners, and then you tell me if you agree or you would disagree or you want to adjust it in any way. Here's what I'm hearing. The way, or one of the best ways to tell if you're making anything an idol is, if you're married, ask your spouse. If you're not married, ask your really close Christian buddies who shoot straight with you. And then kind of a part of that would be, if your marriage is lacking, if you're not spending as much or more time with your wife as you are this thing you're pursuing, if you're not dating her regularly, if she's not saying to you, man, my tank is full, I'm so happy with our marriage, I feel so great about it, yes, I think you should pursue this new thing on weekends. That sounds like something you need. If you're not getting that from your wife, that's your first red flag that you're walking down a path maybe you shouldn't be.
Yeah, here's what I would say. Now, look, in the book, what I tried to do in each chapter is, so look, this is how the book aligns. 15 true crime stories, 15 rules for life that you read in these true crime stories, 15 sets of evidences from secular studies that support this rule for life. And then also, I'm going to show you how the ancient scriptures have always described this. So it turns out there's some evidence for Christianity here, because the Bible describes you the way you really are. And so these are not new principles. People think they're discovering them like they're new principles. They're not. They're ancient principles. Idolatry is an ancient idea, but secular studies show us how we can misplace our priorities and how it hurts us. So here's what I tried to do in the book. One of the sections of each chapter is, well, how can I now do better in this area? So in that section on idolatry, from that chapter about Santa Claus, I just have a series of questions. These questions, if you ask them, will reveal your idols. So they're pretty simple questions. The first and most obvious ones are the ones that you and I always talk about. How do I spend my discretionary money? Look at your checkbook. That's going to show something that you think is of a priority. This is why, by the way, God wants us to tithe first. because
Yeah.
he knew in ancient times that how we spend our discretionary income is an indication of what we worship. 2, how are you spending your discretionary time? Look at your calendar. And I see with guys, man, look, I guarantee you that if you look at how much time you're spending on the job or in the ministry and then with your spouse and your kids, because you got to sleep. So that's got to take the sleep time out, all the prep time out, every commute time out, take all that stuff out. What do you have left? Because you're going to see what's of value to you. Now, look, I get it. It's easy for me to say this because I'm now retired. So there's a season in which, just the way the world works, you're going to have to work to provide for your family. You could argue that if you're working that way, it might be something that you're investing in your family because you have to do this in order to support your family. It could be considered in some ways a time that you've dedicated to your family because you've got to support them. So I think it's easier when you're retired. Okay. Just so you know. But the third one is, how are you spending your talents and abilities? Like I've got, my background was in design and art. I have a bachelor's degree in fine art, a master's degree in architecture, and then I became a detective. I became a police officer. So, like, how do you spend those talents and abilities? Now I'm writing and illustrating. But now here's the ones that get a little more interesting. What captures your thoughts?
Mm.
Like, what do you think the most about, that you give your attention to the most? Here's what Origen said about this, the ancient theologian. What each one honors before all else, what before all things he admires and loves, this for him is God. So ask yourself that question. Here's another one. Like, where do you find yourself getting the most joy? Like, what puts a smile on your face faster than anything else and has the power to kind of please you? That's an issue that you need to look. I'm not saying these are going to necessarily be idols, but it's a good place to start looking for them. How about
Right.
this? What is the stuff that you can't wait for it to happen? You eagerly anticipate it. When I was a kid, I would so eagerly anticipate visits to my grandfather's house, whose name was Warner. So that's why I go by Jay Warner. Because he meant so much to me that he really was. I didn't know God in those days. Warner was God. I mean, this dude, I would be sick the week before, sick thinking, I don't want to get sick and miss the trip. And so I would have these psychosomatic illnesses because I so desperately wanted to see my grandfather. Here's another one. It's easy. When you listen to music, what are you listening to?
Mm-hmm.
I listen to country music, but I have to change the channel or change the song probably every third song because they're all just drinking songs and like you're going to meet someone significant in a bar. Okay, yeah, that stuff. I click next song. I mean, let's at least try to be creative here. Okay, let's at least talk about the world the way it really is. But
Jesus and
music,
Wranglers.
yes, yeah. So music does though expose what it is. But here's the one that I think is where it gets, I think, even dicier. What do you trust? So, if trust is it. I mean, trust is whatever it is you trust to save you. That's your God.
Man, I'll tell you what. Maybe it's just the group I'm around or my geographic area here in Virginia, but I've had a lot of conversations about that one with Christian men, sharp Christian guys that I'm, associating with who, and I'm a gun owner. I'm a Second Amendment guy. I'm a deer hunter. I've got ARs, but I don't trust in them. Right. And I see a lot of, good old boy Christians like myself that it's like, man, how do you reconcile that? And I'll just ask them, I'm like, how do you reconcile, what Paul wrote about government with, and the best answer I ever heard is from a guy, a buddy of mine, who said, yeah, I'm not very good at reconciling that. That's probably my most sinful area.
Yeah,
He's honest. He wasn't trying to
exactly.
growing up, we can trust in our own strength, our own power, our own prepping.
Yeah, preppers for a great example of this, right? So I guess I can say too that as a young man growing up, I don't think I was way overinsured. Life insurance. I mean, I always thought, because I was so poor growing up, I just thought I got to figure out a way to make sure there's this net. But it was a net that I was built that wasn't God. It was just this net that, and now looking back at now that all my life insurance is cashed down and it's all over now, right? Like now it doesn't matter if I die. So I look at this and I think, okay, what was how much money did I waste in insurance over the years? for things that never happened.
If
So that's
financial security is a
yeah,
big
financial
one.
security is a big deal. So identity though is a huge one. So the next question would be like, how do I identify myself? Because that's going to give away what I think has supreme value, because we don't identify with things we don't think are valuable. What do we publicly proclaim? Like if you look at your last 50 social media posts, what are they about? Often what they're about is us shaking a fist at a world we don't understand, or a world which was different. We just now are in the middle of a political season, which is just crazy, right? And never seen it, historically crazy. And I see that so many of us who are typically Christ followers, but we're posting constantly about the political climate, is becoming an idol. And we got to be careful about that. How about this? What do you wear or display? Like what do I have behind me here? Idols. A 30-year career of idols. That's on display behind me. And this is one of the things I'm struggling with. I think one of the first things I want to do, if nothing else, is, you see how my camera is set? I've got somebody coming in to take a look. I don't know. I'm a complete newbie when it comes to setting these high definition cameras that I have. I just want that to be blurred. Like I want that to be more in the distance. I don't want, because the reality of it is that this is all my attic until I started YouTubing. And then I'm like, okay, what do I use for the back wall here? Because I had a pretty ugly back wall. And so I pulled all this junk out of my attic, because where else are you going to put these proclamations that people give you? What are you going to do with these things, right? And I
Yep.
remember
I got that stack of framed Air Force things in the attic too.
Exactly. What are you going to do with those, right? But so whatever the icon is that you're wearing or displaying, and let's just do one last one, a couple last ones here. This is one I think is good. Where are you willing to submit your freedom? Because your idols require submission. And you're going to say, well, I can't do that today because I got to do this. Or I want to get better at this. I'm going to sacrifice part of my day to do this. How about this? What are you unwilling to question? Oh, that's probably an idol. What do you get angry about when someone dents it? This is what happened in this crime case.
Oh, I think that's a big one. What do you get angry about when somebody, mentions it or disparages it or questions it?
Yes.
People have got their allegiance to a lot of strange things.
That's right.
And they're like, whoa, that topic's off limits.
That's right. That's right. That's probably an idol for you. So those are some of the questions that I'm asking. Now, marriage is important, because marriage, I think, is the one relationship that if you do it well, you're with somebody who you actually have given permission to correct you on all of your idolatry. So I think but here's my problem, is that for me, the marriage is often my idol.
Yeah.
See, there's the other problem, is that the first trajectory decision, your first identity, is in Christ. Now, you could argue, and I think it's true, that there's no other earthly relationship of more importance to God than marriage, because every parable about the relationship between Jesus and the church is framed in terms of a wedding feast, the relationship between a bride. Even in the Old Testament, you'll see this all the time. Just reading Amos. Just look at the language. It's always this way. The language, as Isaiah, it's in Jeremiah, the language of the wedding bride and the groom as a relationship, if not between Jesus and the church, between Yahweh and Israel. This is the language, because it's the one relationship we can say is most foundational to culture. I always say that if there was no gospel, because the gospel fixes every kind of stupid you can think of. But if there was no gospel to fix every kind of stupid, you know what would have the biggest impact on human culture? Marriage. A return to traditional marriage. Well, why? Because it's that next tier. But for me, because there were so many years before I knew God, Susie and I were together for 18 years before we became Christians. So we had a pattern of worshiping marriage before I ever knew to worship God. And it's often hard for me to shake that.
Well, yeah, that's a deep one right there.
Well, it's hard. I mean, this is why it's another good thing. Look, if there's nothing else, look at all the good things that God has given you. Probably in there's a few idols, because again, it's always a good thing that we twist that ends up being the idol. So yeah, this is a tough topic, but if we want to worship God, and here's what I would say: if all the men who are listening to this, even if Christianity wasn't true, you should live as though it is, because it turns out that the principles of human flourishing on every metric that are measured by secular studies in the last 40 years value and just simply reaffirm principles that are in the Old and New Testament. And that's what I wanted this book to be. Let me show you 15 ways that if you just adopted these 15 things, you'll have the best life. You'll be the best father. You'll be the best spouse. You'll be the best employee, the best employer. All of those things are there waiting for us. And you have to adopt these 15 things. And they're ancient things. And so I think in the end, if you were aiming at human flourishing, that was the dart you're throwing. If you hit the bullseye, you're going to find yourself on a dartboard called Christianity.
Yeah.
Now, you may not have realized that, but let me show it to you. And then you'll see, okay, if I could simply bend my knee in these 15 areas, I'm going to be an amazing father, an amazing spouse, an amazing friend. Everything is going to change.
Man, that's so good. Guys, pick it up, The Truth in True Crime. Plus, who doesn't want to read about true crime stories? I mean, that's just awesome. I love how every chapter is its own cool crime story. Jim, if I can ask you, I want you to explain this because I've heard you say it before and I love it. I think it's one of my favorite, messages that you are out there putting out. Explain to our listeners, using your 1, 2s, 3s, and 4s, what does jury selection and sharing the gospel have in common?
Well, people ask all the time how you win jury trials. And if you've seen some famous trials in the last 5 years or 10, 20 years, and you thought, well, why did that end up that way? It's because you win jury trials at jury selection. You don't win them in the opening statements or the closing arguments or the rebuttal or even the display of evidence in those 10 weeks or whatever it may be. You win them at at jury selection. And jury selection, because if you pick the wrong jury, it's going to go sideways. That's why sometimes these big cases, the first thing that the defense attorney wants to do is to move the jury to some place where they think it's got a better pool that would be more favorable to his client.
Another state.
Yeah, another state, whatever, another county, so not maybe in the same county, but even in our county, Los Angeles County, there's several different courtrooms you could be tried in. So you want to find a courtroom that actually represents what you think is similar to the suspect's pool rather than the victim's pool. So that's why it's so important to place that thing correctly. Anyway, the point of all that is that we don't just let anyone on a jury. If you've served on a jury, you know that lots of people get excused from the jury. And that's because every state has a number of exemptions, a number of people they can take off. So we start off with 150, 200 people in the room. We only need 12 in the box and maybe a 4 to 6, depending how long the trial is, as alternates, sometimes just 2 as alternates. So you're looking for 14 to 18 people from that 150 people or that 200 people. So you're going to exclude a lot of people. And in our cases, we do a jury survey. So you fill out the survey, we get to evaluate it, and now we kind of know on both sides, who do we want? Who do we think we want? Now we're going to put you on the stand, ask a few questions if it's a homicide trial, because we're trying to figure out where you fall in a range of bias. Because in any room of a jury, there's half the room is probably 4 police officers, maybe half. It's divided into 2 big pieces anyway, regardless of how big those pieces are. Some people trust cops and trust this process. Some people don't. So if you're a prosecutor, you don't really want people on the jury who maybe don't trust prosecutors. And if you're a defense attorney, you don't want people on the jury who really do trust prosecutors. So of those 2 groups, people who trust and people who don't, they can be broken in half. So now you have 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1 and 2, like a 1 is somebody who so trusts a prosecutor and so trusts the system. Maybe they got a family member who's a prosecutor. I don't know. But they think if someone's been arrested and they got this far in the system and they're sitting at that table in a jumpsuit from county jail, they're probably guilty. Let's just convict them now. That's a 1. Okay. 2s are people who are pro-prosecution, but they're fair. If there's not enough evidence, they're not going to convict. 3 are people who are pro-defense. Maybe they've had some bad experiences with the law, or maybe they got somebody who's on the defense side in their family, but they are fair. They will actually prosecute. They will actually convict if there is enough evidence. 4s are people who so distrust the prosecution system that they think everyone's a liar on the prosecution side, especially cops. And this guy's probably been falsely accused. Okay, what are we doing in jury selection? We're trying to get rid of 1s and 4s. That's it. Get rid of the 1s and 4s. because no defense attorney wants a 1 and no prosecutor wants a 4. We'll settle for 2s and 3s. I guarantee you prosecutors would love to have all 2s and defense attorneys would love to have all 3s. But we'll settle for something combination of those 2s and 3s. Now, why does that matter? Because anytime you're proclaiming the gospel to any, you don't know who's out there listening to this, especially on a video. The world's divided into people who are believers and people who aren't. And in America, it's probably about a 50-50 proposition right now. So the question becomes, of those two groups, they can be divided in half too. 1, 2, 3, 4. A 1 is somebody who so loves Christianity that you could never, nothing could persuade them that it's not worth adopting. You could have the body of Jesus and drag it around and say, here he is, we found his bones, he never rose from the grave. They would say, I don't care. This is my family's always been Christians. I love it. It's good for me. I'm not moving. 2s are people who are Christians, but they're like, I have questions sometimes. I don't know how to answer that. That bothers me. 3s are people who are not Christians, but they're like, yeah, I sometimes wonder if there is a God. Maybe Christianity could be true. I don't know. I'd like it. I don't think it is. But 4s are people who are so anti-Christian that they hate the entire worldview and anyone who holds it. Now, what typically happens, I know when I'm speaking about Jesus publicly, it's the 3-quarter principle. Only the 1, 2s, and 3s are really paying attention. 4s have already decided they're out. They are not paying attention. They're actually angry. And if I was to post something online, they would post a negative comment and pretty quickly move to, you're an idiot, negative comment. So those are 4s. Now, I don't put 1s and 4s on juries. So we got to ask ourselves a question. Why do we continue to spend a lot of time on 4s when there are 2s and 3s out there that need help? Now, I think 1s think that apologetics and making a case for Christianity is a waste of time. I'm already in the club. God creates believers, right? I don't need to. Well, do you have kids? I guarantee if you have kids, they're probably 2s and 3s. They're not 1s. If you're a 1, there's a good chance your kids are a 2 and a 3. You want to help them? You want to be able to answer their questions? Then you might want to learn the case, because they don't want to read my stupid book or watch this video. They want you to tell them if Christianity is true. So even for 1s, I want them to learn the case. Of course, 2s and 3s, that's what we love. People who have questions, we want to be able to answer those questions. That's easy. But what do you do with 4s? People who don't want to hear any of it. My dad is a 4. I was a 4 for many years. What do you do with 4s? You can waste a lot of time. I do think you should proclaim the message of the gospel to 4s. Don't get me wrong. But there's 2 more important things you need to do, and that's simply to model and pray. You need to model Christ for 4s, because you don't need to become a further obstacle to where they stand. And you need to pray, because it turns out that none of my arguments have ever moved a 4 to a 3. That is where the power of God draws people first. And so you need to ask God to move that person to a 3 so they can hear everything you've been saying for years and hear it in a new way, because they are now a 3. And so I think in the end, what we don't do when we are talking to our family members, we don't even properly assess where are they, because once I know someone's a 4, if nothing else, I know what my strategy needs to be. It's model and pray, and I have proper expectations of what this conversation at Thanksgiving is going to amount to. Like, what am I hoping to get? Well, I'm hoping just to put a stone in his shoe, and hoping not to build a wall, a further, even stronger wall, because I'm a jerk, and now he's got another reason to think Christianity is a waste of time.
Yeah.
So I think figuring out where your friends and family are in that process, and then saying, okay, here's what I'm going to do, because I know there are 1, 2, 3, or 4, is, and none of us do it. And I don't know why we don't do it. We certainly would never impanel a jury without doing that. And this is the jury you're speaking to about the gospel. Let's just at least be reasonable about how we pick a jury.
I love that. And it's important for us to think about that as Christians, as evangelists. Sometimes I think you can be talking to a 4, but you're really talking to the 2 or the 3 that's listening in, that's just kind of sitting on the sideline of the conversation. Sometimes I'll reply to somebody on social media, not really for them, but for the other person that I think or know is reading these comments, right? So sometimes that's like a ricochet evangelism, right? Isn't that what
that's Lee Strobel called that? Yeah, for sure.
So how do you know? How do you determine whether somebody's a 4?
Well, you can see the hostility. It's almost always becomes a personal attack. And once they start moving to personal attacks, You're a liar.
Mm.
You. It's not the case anymore. It's something about you.
Yeah,
You know
you're
you're
a
dealing with a
bigot.
four.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that this is where it gets tricky. And I'll just tell you what my approach has been. Whether it's right or wrong, I don't know. I think when I had a very small platform and the comments were very small, very small in number, I was definitely taking that approach where, hey, I'm going to answer this calmly and collectively so that the twos and threes that are paying attention will hear how to answer it. And then, of course, it right away provokes another response from the four. And now you have to have time, because if you stop engaging, your silence will seem to the twos and threes like you don't have an answer. So you have to, if you're going to respond to fours on your public platform, especially vile fours, and I get a lot of that, you better have, that's a separate ministry in and of itself. Now, I don't have a 501c3. I don't have a staff. I'm a one-man guy, just a dude who retired from law enforcement and wrote a book. That's it. That's all I am. That's all I'm ever going to be. I'm not looking to start another career. I'm not looking to take, I won't take donations from anybody. This is just me doing, selling books. Yes, I figure if I can, and I want to give you a lot. So if you buy one of my books, I'm going to have a ton of free stuff that's going to come with it, because I feel like it's hard to ask people to spend money on a book. The gospel is free. So that's why we provide a lot of content for free. But what happened was that platform grew. And then I had tons of people who now are targeting you because they see you're effective. And now you become the target of all kinds of people who are making all kinds of slanderous claims. And at that point, you really have to kind of ratchet it down and just have your platform be, it's like you're like a church leader now. And in your congregation, you got to decide, am I going to let someone come into the congregation week after week and simply scream from the back of the room? Is that productive for I'm shepherding a group of people who have questions, and they're twos and threes. They have serious questions. And I'm going to have to protect them from the guy shouting, ad hominems at the back of the room. And so a lot of my approach to social media has changed on that, is that I feel like this is a church that I need to shepherd. And that's why I don't for the most part engage that they know where to find me. If they really, it's so interesting, is that if the interaction wasn't public, they are not interested in interacting with me.
That's a
Like, they
great
know where to
point.
find me privately. This could just be a series of private emails. First thing they would do is make those emails public, because what they're interested in is not the question. They're interested in the public fight because it's helping their platform. And I just realized that early on that no, that doesn't serve anyone. And you got to ask yourself a question. How much time are you willing to spend on fours, knowing that time is coming from somewhere? That time is coming from your family life. That time is coming from efforts you could be making with twos and threes. It's about prioritizing. And I think God wants us to be smart in that regard, right? When you know you've got somebody he has not moved yet. And by the way, once he's moved them, you'll know, because they'll reach out to you privately.
Yeah.
Until that happens, there's no point in engaging that person. They know where to find me. They know the claims. They've twisted the claims. They want to simply hurt the twos and threes that are in your church.
Yeah.
So once that's the goal, the best service you can do your twos and threes is to protect them from fours.
That's good.
When I adopted children, let me put it this way. When I adopted children, I knew I already had two biological children, and I knew that I needed to do the most I could for the children I was about to adopt while doing the least harm I could to the two I already had. And I think that's the role we have to play on social media. Yeah, I could engage this. Is it my ego just being upset that I want to engage this? Is that why I'm doing it? How much harm am I going to do to the children I already have, to the people I already have who are here trying to seek honest answers? And so I think that prioritization is important.
Wow, that's good. That requires a lot of discernment, and it requires us to be doing a little bit more active thinking as we go into a conversation, instead of just stumbling into it, really asking ourselves and asking the person questions to figure out where they are. Am I dealing with a 2, 3, or 4 here? And how much time should I give according to that?
Yeah.
So, I think that's a great way, instead of just some one size fits all approach to entering into these conversations all over the place. I think that view that you've just spelled out for us can help us be more effective as ambassadors for Christ.
Yeah, I hope it does. I mean, I hope it. And it's just about figuring out who you're talking to. And that's something have you ever heard that expression, how sometimes we spend more time thinking about our response? We're not listening to what the other person's really saying. We're just kind of charting and planning our response.
Right.
So active listening is so important, right? What do you tell your kids when you're raising them? This is why God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth.
Right.
It's that principle.
Yeah, and it really just highlights that as ambassadors for Christ, we've got to be great listeners. We've
Yeah.
got to hear people's story and get to know them and care about them and understand where they're coming from and what baggage they're bringing into this, and so that we can meet them where they are.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Well,
for sure. Yeah.
Jim, thank you so much for your time. One of the things I love about every time we've talked, every time you've been on this podcast, you have highlighted the primacy of marriage and the importance of marriage, and the fact that as Christian men, as husbands and fathers, our ministry begins at home, and it doesn't matter what we're doing out there for the masses. If we're failing at the dinner table, then we're failing. So I appreciate that aspect of what you are constantly highlighting. It's such an important reminder. I need to be reminded of it. Everybody does, and that's huge. Guys, check this out: The Truth in True Crime. Also, his website is coldcasechristianity.com. That'll be linked in the show notes. You can go there, read his articles. There's fantastic short articles, podcasts, books, everything you need. I did not know you were a one-man, non-staff, non-501c3 show. That's surprising because you are all over the place doing a ton of stuff from my perspective. So
it's
kudos
just the illusion.
to you.
Yeah, it's the illusion of being. It's a helpful illusion. But here's what it comes down to, Dave. It's about me wanting. I see all of this content creation as a kind of as a spiritual habit. Like the same way that the disciplines you develop. You read, you pray. These are spiritual disciplines, and I think that for me, one of those spiritual disciplines is how often am I able on a consistent basis. And so I've just kind of stuck to my Monday, Wednesday, Friday routine of posting something that I hope advances people's thinking when it comes to who Jesus is. And really, and one of the ways we can protect ourselves, like you and I both know, is just take your eyes off the results. I do it every day. If no one read it, I can look back and say, okay, did I pray today? Did I read my scripture today? I don't want to get legalistic, but as humans, we often do. But if I'm going to be overly committed to a routine, it should be this one, right? Because I've in the past, I was always overly committed to my workout routine, to my whatever it was. And now at 63, you're like, well, really? What is that? I mean, do you think that Arnold at some point said, why am I working out this hard? Probably. He probably did. And so I think that this is the one routine that I think is healthy to continue to labor away and see it as a discipline.
Man, that's awesome. Well, thank you for what you're doing, brother. And
thank you for having me, Dave. I appreciate you.
Yeah, look forward to having you on again soon, and we'll continue this conversation.
Awesome.
To find out more about what we're doing and to join us on our mission, go to men'salliancetribe.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a 5-star review.